and welcome to Better Government, straight from your state capital in Honolulu, Hawaii. I'm Representative Gene Ward, and I have the honor to interview someone who I hope at the end is going to be able to tell us how we can save some money and lower the cost of living in the state of Hawaii. I want to welcome to Better Government, Mike Hansen. Mike, welcome.
Thank you for having me on.
You are the chair of the Shippers Council, but before we get into that and the Jones Act, some people think that maybe this is about keeping up with the Jones when they hear the Jones Act. Let's talk about Mike Hansen, Punahou graduate, Willamette, UH. What else? What have you been doing?
Well, started in the early 70s in the maritime industry in Honolulu Harbor, and did a number of different things. I moved on to ship agency. I ran and operated my own ship agency for a long time.
What do shipping agencies do?
Represent ships and owners of vessels that are calling on the port of whatever port.
Well, you're not a Matson guy.
No, it was an independent agency, and so we took care of ships that came into the harbor who did not have an office here. So they would, the shipping companies would appoint you as an agent, and then you would make the arrangements for the vessel when it called in port, whatever those arrangements were the loading or discharging a cargo or whatever might have to be done.
Okay, so you know what's happening on Honolulu's docks, and you've seen the traffic coming and going, and now getting into the hard part of what is often stereotyped as the Jones Act that people hear about, but they're not often sure about what it is or what it means. Let's start with the definition. What is the Jones Act?
The Jones Act is Section 27 of the Merchant Marine Act of 1920. And what it says that a vessel must be U.S. built, U.S. flag, U.S. crewed, U.S. owned, and U.S. operated in order to transport cargo from one place in the United States to another. That's the cargo cabotage regulation of the United States.
So for almost the last, 1920, that was when the Hawaiian Home Act was
1921
passed.
was.
So that's pushing
100
years.
Exactly.
How many ships have we got that are owned, manned, and flagged by Americans right now?
Well,
in fact, listen, how big is the whole
universe
shipping? The universe of ships. I mean, is it not like air cargo? It seems like that's taking a big part of it. But what's the universe of shipping in the world? So we can then get down to the
in the world. Usually they segment the shipping industry into vessels that are ships that are over 1,000 gross tons.
Mm-hmm.
And in that case, there's something on the order of, I believe it's something around 40,000 ships in the world.
40,000 ships.
Right.
At any given day, they're plying the oceans.
Exactly.
And the seas.
And in the United States, Jones Act ships, we have about 100 Jones Act ships.
I thought we were a maritime power. You mean we got 100 ships out of 40,000 ships? And we're America the Great?
Yeah. And we have another 100 ships in the so-called U.S. flag international trade fleet. Those ships are not Jones Act qualified vessels. They can't carry cargo from one U.S. port to another, but they're used by the U.S. military and other U.S. government agencies for the carriage of what's known as preference cargoes. Most of those ships are, in fact, they're all foreign built.
But when you add 100 Jones Act
Ships.
Qualified and 200 ships out of 40,000.
That's right.
I'm thinking if this was the British Empire, we'd say we've lost our empire. 200 out of 40,000.
Right. Now, there are something on the order of 100, it's something 50 or 70,000 vessels that are said to be in the Jones Act fleet. But those are mostly river barges and push tugboats and other tugs and barges that are not usually classified with the ships.
Is that in the 40,000? No, cannot.
No. Yeah.
Oh, that's separate. That's basically domestic waterways on the Mississippi, on the Ohio River,
and also coastal.
And coastal, up and down Florida.
Short hop stuff.
Okay. So what we've got is a piece of legislation that you have been a champion of. Could you explain what?
Yes. What we've proposed at the Hawaii Shippers Council is a limited reform of the Jones Act. What we are putting forward is that we would like to see the U.S. build requirement exempted for what are known as the non-contiguous trades. Those are the trades involving Alaska, Guam, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico.
And why do you want to do that?
Because the non-contiguous jurisdictions are almost entirely dependent upon ocean shipping for surface transportation. That these ships are a key link in those four economies.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have the alternative that exists on the contiguous United States, where you have train, pipeline, road truck transportation to either compete with shipping or to replace it entirely.
Now, for the average consumer watching this, what is the implication if there was an exemption or an exception to Hawaii as well as Puerto Rico and is it Alaska?
Alaska
Alaska.
And Guam, yeah.
And Guam, that's right. We can't forget our brothers in Guam. What's the implication for what, if you saw the newspaper last week, it said that $75,000 gives you a modest lifestyle in Hawaii. $75,000 for a family of four, just to sort of make ends meet and keep your head above the water.
Right, and not put any money away for a rainy day.
So what's the cost of the Jones Act?
The cost of the Jones Act can be calculated in different ways.
Okay.
Say, for example, there are those who wish to see the Jones Act eliminated entirely so that you could have, say, foreign flag shipping between here and the West Coast. Now, there's lots of problems with such a proposal, but if you take that as a proposition and work out what the numbers might be, that would substantially reduce shipping costs, make many more vessels available. But it's highly unlikely that such an exemption could be passed for Hawaii or the other non-contiguous jurisdictions. So we don't see that as a likely prospect.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What we're seeing, and that would probably generate the biggest savings in terms of ocean freight costs and make the most of ships available to Hawaii and the other non-contiguous territories. However, we see that it's the prospects of a Jones Act exemption, a limited one, just to the build requirement for deep draft ocean-going ships. That way we don't infringe upon the tug and barge market, and we concentrate the reform in the area where it's most needed, which is in the big ship area.
So it would still be flagged by Americans, manned by Americans.
It would be U.S. flag, so you'd have U.S. flag, U.S. crew, U.S. owned, and U.S. operated.
What kind of a car do you drive?
Probability. Drive a Ford.
Oh, I was going to say probability. It's not an American-made car.
But the ocean shipping is the only area where in the United States you're required to use equipment that has been built in the United States. For example, in the airline industry, they fly Airbuses that are manufactured in France. We've all seen foreign manufactured buses on the road carrying passengers. So this is a unique facet of the maritime cabotage legislation.
Where is the city and county going to buy their train?
I believe those are coming from Italy, aren't they?
Yeah, it's another example of all the mass transit cars.
Almost all
so
the mass
all
transit.
All these vehicles, airplanes, cars,
trucks.
Even though Ford now, I understand, is selling worldwide better than the Corona.
Oh.
And surprisingly, America's getting back into the game again. But we have a prohibition on anything that sails.
That carries cargo.
That carries cargo cannot be American. I'm trying to get back to if that build exemption was allowed.
Yeah.
In other words, it could. Where are the big shipbuilding places in the world? Let's see where.
The three largest shipbuilding countries in the world today are Japan, South Korea, and China.
Okay, not the Rotterdam and all that image of.
Europe has had been in the 60s and 70s and even to the 80s quite a strong shipbuilding area, but they've lost most of that to the Asian powers.
Where does America build its ships?
There are 8 large, what they call major shipbuilding yards in the United States. They're located on they're on the East Coast, there's a couple on the Gulf Coast, and there's one on the West Coast.
And how many floating vessels do they actually manufacture that are related to what you're talking about?
Yeah, those 8 major shipbuilding yards construct approximately 2 deep draft ocean-going ships per year.
So there's still some production, but large numbers. It's still
compared
small.
to Japan. Japan has a smaller production than South Korea, and Japan fairly regularly turns out something on the order of 200 deep draft ships per year.
200 to 1. That's quite a ratio.
Yeah, the shipyards in the United States are just no longer competitive in the area of constructing deep draft ships.
So what is the downside of doing that?
Of providing the exemption?
Yes.
I don't really see much of a downside. The advantage.
So why isn't it passed? Why is the legislation?
The advantage of it is that far more ships at a much lower cost would become available to the non-contiguous trades.
So Matson could buy those ships then?
Yeah. For example, Matson right now is I'm planning to order 2 3,000 container ships, known as TEU, 20-foot equivalent unit ships, in the next 2 to 5 years for approximately $200 million apiece. That same ship could be ordered from South Korea at the cost of $40 million.
Wow. That's 5 times the difference.
And in addition
That's
to
amazing.
that, in addition to that, the shipyard in the United States that would construct those 2 ships for Matson will buy the plans from a South Korean yard. We are no longer designing these commercial ships.
Are you telling us that if that was allowable, that the consumer who is watching this show could actually save on a monthly basis, or at least some money in the cost of what otherwise, when we say the price of paradise is because of shipping costs and all that? Is there a figure, Mike, that you could actually give saying that if what is being proposed comes to pass and Matson could buy these ships, would that necessarily be passed on to consumers? And if so, do you have any numbers that?
We've been working on some numbers and they're not ready yet. They're in the hands of our economists now, so it's going to be a while. But the thing is that the costs of the ships would come down substantially.
Yeah, 200 million down to 40 is.
Yeah, and the thing is that in the Jones Act fleet, we're operating many very old ships.
What's the average age?
The average age of a container ship in the non-contiguous trades is 28 years.
What's the shelf life or the ship life of a ship?
Most container ships, the average age of a container ship in the world today is 12 years.
Wow. Okay, so we got
and most container ships are retired by the age of 20. So in the Jones Act fleet, all the container ships that exist in the Jones Act fleet are operating in the non-contiguous trades. They're too expensive to use in the coastal trade. Say from New York to, say, New Orleans, for example.
Can't make any money on that route then.
They're too expensive to operate in those trades.
If you go from Oakland to Honolulu,
where there is no railroad track and no
with
highway,
well, air routes, but then that's a little bit more expensive.
Very,
eh?
very little cargo moves by air.
In fact, what is the ratio of what we're said to import 85 to 90% of everything we either consume or use or
Right.
operate our lives with? What percentage of that is air versus cargo?
98, over 98% of the cargo arrives by sea.
Okay, so we are really
Highly dependent upon.
shipping is very, very important, and I'm very impressed that you come out of the shipping industry with your own experience down on the docks. So you're not talking hypothetical or theoretical kinds
Right.
of things.
Anyway, so so reducing the cost of these ships, the capital cost of these ships, would have a large impact. It would today, with the high cost of constructing the ships in the United States, we have what's known as a high barrier to entry. In order to enter one of these trades, you would have to purchase a U.S. built ship at an enormous cost that most ship owners in the world would refuse to pay because they would think that it's far too risky to do.
So to get into the business is going to be a high, high hurdle.
They call it a barrier to entry.
So that means protecting those who are already in the industry. How many shipping companies are there in the United States? I mean, we know Matson,
Right.
Horizon for Hawaii.
Of the container shipping companies that operate in the domestic trade, we've got Matson, which operates to Hawaii and Guam. We've got Horizon Lines, which operates to Hawaii, Alaska, and Puerto Rico. We have Sea Star Line. Well, there's actually one company called Tote, and they've got two subsidiaries, one called Sea Star Line that operates in the Puerto Rico trade, and their ocean trailer unit that operates in the Alaska trade from the Puget Sound. And then there's Crowley Maritime, which operates in the Puerto Rico trade.
But but the ships that come in across the Atlantic into New York.
Oh no,
that's more. That's more shipping companies, right?
Yeah, but none of those are American.
So you can deliver something from overseas on a non-American ship into New York.
Yeah, on what's
But why can't you have something from Beijing to Honolulu?
You can.
And how many, or let's say, how often does that happen?
Nippon Yosen Kaisha, NYK line, operates a fortnightly service from Asia to Honolulu using a smaller container ship. I think it's about 800 TEU.
So we get Japanese coming in? Do we get?
Yeah, but that ship calls in China, South Korea, and Japan, and through transshipment picks up cargo from all over Asia. And we also have vessels that call directly from Australia and New Zealand on a monthly basis.
The restriction of the Jones Act is that they cannot pick up any cargo and go to another port in the United States.
The Jones Act says that you have to be those 5 things: U.S. built, U.S. flag, U.S. crewed, U.S. owned, and U.S. operated, in order to carry cargo from one U.S. point to another.
But wasn't there exception in this, in the shipping industry, even though it's ships for passengers, for cruises, for fun, and for entertainment? Wasn't the beloved Senator Inouye helpful in getting an exemption for some of the cruise
Senator
lines?
Inouye got an exemption for Norwegian Cruise Lines, NCL.
Give us the history of that.
I think it was 2003. If you remember correctly, under American Hawaiian Cruises, they proposed to build 2 passenger ships in a U.S. shipyard to replace the independence and the Constitution. And that project fell flat on its face. The American Hawaiian Cruises went belly up. The ships were uncompleted on the ways, and the shipyard couldn't finish the ships.
But they did get the exemption. Was that correct?
Yes, but what the next step that Senator Inouye took was then to grant a build exemption and also an ownership exemption to allow those uncompleted ships to be taken to a shipyard in Germany, completed as foreign flag ships, I mean foreign-built ships,
Mm.
and then given coastwise privileges upon their completion. And they could bring in a third ship that was completely foreign-built, which they did. At one time, they were operating 3 ships, if you remember, Norwegian NCL.
Are those ships still plying the waters today?
There's only one left, Pride of America.
Well, okay.
There were too many ships for too small a market.
So there is a bit of a precedent in the arena of
the
cruise ships.
Sure.
For cruise ships. That is the area.
Mm-hmm.
What about repairs? You know, fixing things at the shipyard, and is that where most of the, or where does Hansen fix their ships?
Hansen performs almost all of, well, they perform many of their repairs on the U.S. West Coast.
Mm-hmm.
For example, Hansen has had to refurbish its inter-island container barges, and they've taken those, rotated them out of service, and they've been substantially rebuilt at a yard in the San Francisco Bay. But Hansen, Horizon, and some of the other companies have sent ships to China for refurbishing. But they have to stay under certain limits to avoid having the work there classified as being rebuilt. And there's a whole set of rules and regulations that cover this that the Coast Guard monitors.
So you can actually take your ship to China and get it rebuilt?
No, well, you can do some...
Or repairs?
You can get some extensive repair work done, and even some modest rebuilding work done, as long as it doesn't exceed certain well-defined limits. Mm. And there's been a number of court cases where shipyards will sue the ship owners, and other ship owners will sue the other ship owner, and about whether or not they went past these limitations on rebuilding in a foreign place. And if the ship is determined to have been rebuilt in a foreign place where it exceeded these limitations, then it loses its Jones Act privileges.
Mm. So there's a bit of a risk involved.
Huge risk, yeah.
With what limited time we have left, how about some legislative updates on where the Jones Act has been, where it's going, and what you see down the line in the future? Yeah,
there's been a number of efforts in the past to reform the Jones Act. You probably remember Rob Cortell?
Yes.
And the Jones Act Reform Coalition, 1994.
It was a federal one, wasn't it?
Yes, he was 2000. Well, it's a federal law, so it has to be a federal effort. Mm. And what he and his group had proposed was to allow foreign flag ships over 1,000 gross tons into some of the domestic shipping markets. Mm. But those ships under such a legislation would be primarily limited to single voyage type operation. So really would not have affected our liner service all that much, the container ship services.
So he had introduced the legislation in the Congress.
Yeah, they based upon the original Jones Act Reform Coalition model legislation. I think there were a total of 4 bills that were introduced over that period of time. He got some sponsorship, some good sponsorship, and he succeeded in having a hearing in the House, but that's as far as it got.
Now you mentioned earlier that it's really Hawaii, Guam, Alaska, and Puerto Rico,
which are the non-contiguous jurisdictions. And in the actual shipping laws of the United States, these are referred to as the non-contiguous trades.
Are the contiguous states, however, in favor of that exemption? What's the political climate look like for keeping?
What I've been told by both members of the House and Senate who are not from one of the non-contiguous jurisdictions is that they would like to see at least one member of each of the non-contiguous jurisdictions in favor of the legislation. And a majority of the congressional delegations non-contiguous delegations in favor of the reform proposal. So we've got a lot of work to do in that regards. The representative from Puerto Rico is Pedro Perlusi. He's a Democrat. He just introduced today Jones Act reform legislation that would allow foreign-built U.S. flag ships carrying bulk cargoes into the Puerto Rico trade.
Mm-hmm. So something is moving. Is there anything
Sure.
in the Hawaii congressional delegation that's...
There's no one in the Hawaii delegation from what I know of who is interested in sponsoring Jones Act reform legislation. They're all support the Jones Act in its full state as it exists today.
So, Mike, as we wrap up, what's a takeaway for where do we go from here, or where, for the person listening to this, what is the takeaway? What's the bottom line? What's the message you want to convey today?
The Jones Act requirement for U.S. build costs everybody in the non-contiguous jurisdictions, including Hawaii, a great deal of economic cost, and this can be relieved at very little imposition on the system by granting an exemption to the build requirement for the non-contiguous jurisdictions.
There you've got it. The cost of living can be impacted as much as we think that it'll never change, it'll never go down. These are one of the options that could be for better government and for a better way to keep more food at your table and money in your pocket. We've run out of time. I'm Representative Gene Ward with Mike Hansen of the Hawaii Shippers Council, thanking you for viewing and wishing you aloha. Thank you, Mike.
Okay.